A Complete Unknown is out in theaters, written and directed by James Mangold, based on a book called Dylan Goes Electric by Elijah Wold. This film stars Timothée Chalamet, Edward Norton, Elle Fanning, and Monica Barbaro. It is, of course, a movie about Bob Dylan, specifically the first part of his career, starting with the moment the 19-year-old Dylan gets off the bus in the New York Village, only weeks away from being discovered and then subsequently rising to meteoric fame, and ending with the famous, or infamous, depending on how we look at it, 1965 Newport Folk Festival, where he went electric for the first time. Two things to address right away. One, I was very worried about Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan. I do think he's an amazing actor, but I just couldn't see him performing this specific role. Seeing as Dylan has this unique way of speaking and singing, I was worried that it would come off as cheap imitation or a caricature. However, I'm happy to say I was proven wrong. Chalamet is amazing and disappears right into the role. After some time, I no longer saw him, I just saw Dylan. He nails the sort of nasal way of speaking, the voice, the mannerisms, the sort of physicality even of the role. But also, perhaps even more impressively, he nails the musical aspect. He sings and plays all of the songs in the movie himself, and he does a terrific job. It sort of reminded me of Taron Egerton in Rocketman, where you can hear he's doing something close to the original thing, but it's still distinct enough that you can hear the difference clearly. But it's still very well done in its own right. So that centerpiece of the film definitely works. Second thing to address, the movie is not really a traditional biopic, as some may expect. It doesn't cover Dylan's entire life, doesn't go deep into his past, which I think is a great choice because Bob Dylan is a deliberately mysterious character, and he has been known to lie about things in his own life. What the movie does instead is focus on this one period of his career, viewed through the lenses of two main plot lines. One is about his romantic relationships, his two romantic relationships. The first one is with Sylvie Russo, a New York artist who is the only fictional prominent character in the film, although she is heavily based on Suze Rotolo, Dylan's girlfriend at the time, and the woman on the cover of Free Will and Bob Dylan. And according to the filmmakers, it is basically the same character, they just changed the name. And the second one, with the second relationship with with one of the most famous folk singers of the time, Joan Baez. Dylan in the film keeps bouncing back and forth between Sylvie, who had a massive impact on his views, his writing, and his interest in socio-political issues of the time, and Joan, who is more of a femme fatale, clearly an accomplished singer in her own right, but in turn also someone deeply fascinated with Dylan's songwriting and someone wanting to use those songs for herself. The second plotline is about Dylan being immediately defined as a folk singer and himself immediately trying to reject this label, this and other labels, in fact, refusing to be boxed in, always seeking change and disruption, breaking away from other people's expectations of him. And this, of course, immediately, starting with him being the new voice in folk and wanting to record his own stuff instead of the classics, and then simmering, this sort of feeling simmers throughout the film until it culminates with the start of the electric phase, which happens in spite of his naysayers. Now, I think the movie is very good, despite the fact that there are some flaws here and there. I do think it's a bit too long. It gets a little bit too sluggish in the middle. I do think Sylvie ends up not really being an interesting character in the end, and serves more as a plot device for Dylan than a fully fleshed out character in her own right. And I do think some individual scenes, notably the ones with Woody, are maybe a little too on the nose. But on the whole, I think it's a strong movie because it manages to capture this interesting struggle against labels and expectations within Dylan without necessarily spelling everything out too clearly. People online have complained about the lack of plot. I would argue that this isn't a movie where the plot is all that important. The important thing is the internal conflict, and that is done very, very well. There are also moments when the movie shines really brightly. The scene where, with Dylan performing Masters of War during the Cuban Missile Crisis and Joan picking him up from the club right after, the scene singing The Times They Are A-Changing for the first time at the festival, the duet with Joan singing It and Me Babe, their small duet in the apartment after their first night together, when it's clear she's a much better vocalist but he's a much better songwriter, and they both realize those things while singing together. Brilliant scene. The final electric performance of Like a Rolling Stone, all of the scenes with Johnny Cash, terrific. All of those that I mentioned are highlights of the film, where it gets truly phenomenal. I do also want to highlight how much of the movie is just music being played. It really is remarkable in a world of biopics, which will often play 20 seconds of a song, of a famous song, before moving on to the next one. In this one, sometimes you will have 2 or 3 songs played in their entirety before the scene moves on. The film is very patient with that, and I love that aspect of it, because it helps highlight how good all of the actors are at singing. I mentioned Chalamet, but all the others of the main cast are doing their own singing too. Edward Norton is remarkable as Peter Siegel. Monica Barbaro as Joan knocked me out with her beautiful singing voice and amazing palpable chemistry with Timothée Chalamet. And Boyd Holbrook is fantastic as Johnny Cash, to the point where I immediately thought, that's Boyd Holbrook, but then thought, no, that can't be him, that must be another actor, and it was him. So all in all, I thought this was a very good movie, although it may be different than what some people would expect it to be. It's not a straight biopic, instead it being more interested in the main conflict in Dylan's life at a certain point in his career, and I think that makes it a stronger movie, because it manages to be engaging and interesting while still maintaining the sort of mystique and enigma of Bob Dylan himself. If you're a fan of his music, this is definitely a must watch.